Okay, so I think we'll begin. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Amy Sam. I am the Health Education Project Specialist at the Maxwell and Eleanor Blum Patient Family Learning Center at Mass General Hospital. Today's program is a special collaboration between the Blum Center and Mass General Cancer Center. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few items with you all. Please note today's session is being recorded for educational purposes. If you're interested in viewing the recording, you can visit the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Please note everyone is in listen-only mode. Everyone has been muted so that we can hear our guest speaker today. If you have any questions for our guest speaker, feel free to enter them in the chat box, which is located in the bottom of your screen. We'll have time for them in the end. Only Blum Center staff, co-host, and guest speaker will see them. Please do not share any personal medical information or questions in the chat box. If you have any personal medical questions, please ask your doctor. Okay, Dr. Jacobs, would you like to share your slides? So next, I would like to introduce you all to Devin Punch. She is the health educator for Mass General Cancer Center, and she is going to introduce you all to today's guest speaker.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone for joining today. Dr. Jacobs, thank you so much for being here. Today's topic is on caring for yourself while caring for someone with cancer. Dr. Damie Jacobs, is a clinical psychologist at the Mass General Cancer Center and an assistant professor of psychology in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. She's a clinical researcher and the director of the Caregiver Research Program at Mass General Cancer Outcomes Research and Education Program, or CORE. Her research encompasses caregiver-centered research focused on reducing anxiety and improving coping for family and friends caring for someone with cancer, as well as patient-centered work focused on adherence to treatment and symptom management. In the Psychiatric Oncology Service at MGH, she specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy to improve coping and adjustment during and after cancer, as well as at the end of life. Thank you, Dr. Jacobs, and I turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Devin. Thank you, Amy, for having me. And thank you all for being here with me today to talk about how you might figure out ways to care for yourself while you're caring for someone else, either going through cancer treatment or has recently completed treatment, or just need some extra caregiving later on, even being further out. So as we go through today, my goal is to really try to help you understand how to incorporate this most bottom box here, self-care, back into your regimen. We acknowledge that caregiving, especially in the context of cancer, requires so much from you all. Perhaps you are parents, a mother or a father of someone, perhaps you're a child, a daughter or a son, a sister, a brother, or you're caring for a spouse. No matter who you are, you can probably identify with the loads of things that you have had to perhaps very quickly take on in order to help care for someone, and that your life hasn't slowed down at all, that you still have your job, maybe your own dependents and children, your own finances, your own responsibilities, your own social life, and things that really end up taking a hit. So by the end of today, I really hope that you come away with at least one thing that you might be able to do differently to reincorporate self-care into your daily life. We know so much about distress in caregivers of people with cancer. This has been a topic that has gained a lot more interest and recognition in the past decade. We originally thought mostly about caregiving in the dementia world. This was where caregivers first started to gain recognition as people who are distressed, dealing with their own mental health issues and physical health issues while taking care of someone maybe with Alzheimer's dementia or other related dementias. And now this has really moved into the oncology world, where we're recognizing that cancer is a chronic condition, requires so much, and that really varies depending on the type of cancer also that someone is dealing with. And so there's so much put onto the caregiver. We call this burden, but some people feel that it's very fulfilling to be a caregiver. You can feel that it's fulfilling, but also feel like it's burdensome. You also calling in today, you might be a patient. You might be someone who is dealing with cancer and you're concerned about a loved one or someone who's supporting with you and that they're getting their own needs met. Or maybe you're just a patient and you're looking for some extra stress management skills. And no matter who you are, I think that you can benefit from what we'll discuss today. Caregivers overall, we have found, have more unmet needs than patients, and those needs are often considered secondary or overlooked. And we don't really have a lot of good programs, or as we call in the research world, interventions to improve outcomes. Although this is a national priority, even with funding now from the NIH that has been designated for caregiver research in oncology. There's an emotional toll that equates to up to 50% of caregivers reporting elevated anxiety or depression in the oncology literature. And that we know that distress is really interdependent, meaning the more stressed the patient is, the more stressed the caregiver is, and vice versa. So if we can lower distress in our caregivers, we might also be able to lower distress in our patients. There's a physical toll. Our caregivers, you might relate to this, are chronically stressed, which can lead to sleep disturbances and fatigue, and also maybe more of the common cold or even more serious conditions like heart disease because of a suppressed immune function with all of the stress that you're under. This can lead to a sort of it can influence the healthcare system in the sense that you might be less likely to go to routine visits because you don't feel like you have the time to do anything for yourself. And okay, that, knee pain, I'll take care of that later. But you also might be more likely to go to more urgent visits. Like, oh man, that knee pain got really bad. I think I might need surgery. I actually had someone who ended up in that situation where there was a little issue, a little annoyance in her body that she ignored for so long because she didn't feel like she had the time to address it. And then it became a real issue that she needed urgent medical attention for. So we've developed at Mass General this caregiving research program based on all this literature that shows how important it is to care about the carers. Our mission is to really bring together clinical researchers who share this passion for supporting the network of people that surround our patients at the Cancer Center. And here's just a snapshot of our new website that we recently have up. So feel free to Google it or go to this URL, massgeneral.org/cancer/center /caregiving/research. And probably just easier for you to Google MGH Caregiver Research Program and see some of the work that we're doing. We have a team of great researchers from our Cancer Outcomes Research and Education Program. And all of these wonderful researchers are doing really important work that focuses on the well-being and quality of life of our caregivers. We really want to understand and characterize the distress that friends and family members are feeling while they're caring for someone, with the goal of developing programs that can help improve quality of life and reduce distress by improving coping. And then our ultimate goal is really to integrate those programs into clinical care so that at Mass General, we can be a type of institution that provides not just care for the patients, but also for the families and friends. One of the ways we do this is by speaking with caregivers like yourselves directly. We interview them, we have focus groups at which time we ask them, what are the things that you're concerned about most? And you can see here from some of these quotes, sometimes it's about how to deal with cognitive changes in the person that they're caring for. Sometimes it's about how to maximize social support because people originally are really there for you. And then over time, sometimes lose interest or forget that you're still coping with something really difficult while their life goes on. We also do this by giving surveys and measures to participants in our studies. This is a little bit of data, and forgive me, but I'm a researcher, so I can't have a presentation that doesn't share a little bit of data. But symptoms of depression in caregivers of our patients at Mass General with brain tumors. And you can see here, the patients are in the blue and the caregivers are in the purple. And this was the time of diagnosis, and then at 3 months, 6 months, and 9 months after diagnosis. And what this shows is that at all of these time points, patients and caregivers, about a quarter of them, were reporting that they had clinically significant depressive symptoms. But look interestingly at what happens when we looked at anxiety. So here again, the patients in blue and the caregivers are in purple. And at these same time points, more than half of the caregivers are reporting clinically significant levels of anxiety. So this is just some of the research, and this was done by a colleague of mine in the Neuro-Oncology Center, Dr. Deborah Forst, a neuro-oncologist, that we really started to base a lot of our work on, realizing that we're not doing a good job of addressing the distress and the anxiety felt by our caregivers here. The next step of some of our research is this new study that I'm excited to tell you about, where we are actually partnering with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. And so Mass General is one site and Memorial Sloan Kettering is another site, where we are offering through this study 8 free private and virtual sessions with a counselor. So if you are someone who is caring for someone with cancer, you might be eligible if you're feeling distressed and would like some tools for coping and for managing stress. So I can tell you a little bit more about this study at the end, but no matter which group, some of you might be familiar with research and know that sometimes there's a randomization process where there's a 50% chance of getting one group or the other. The exciting thing about this study is that we're looking at 2 different types of therapy programs. So if you're a caregiver in this blue box and you enroll in our study, you will get either one therapy program or the other therapy program. So either way, it's a win-win. You get 8 sessions. And then we ask you to do some measures at a few follow-up time points. And we also ask the person that you're caring for to do some measures at the time that you enroll and 3 months later. So I'm happy to answer more questions about this study, but I did want to let you all know about this opportunity because it is right now the largest trial of caregivers probably in the nation. And it's a really great opportunity for you to get free therapy and have it generalized no matter what cancer type the person that you're caring for is being treated for or recently was treated for. If you're interested in the study, and we can put this in the chat or I can tell you about it more again at the end, you can email caregiving research at mgh.harvard.edu or call our wonderful research coordinator, Julia, at this phone number. And we're happy to tell you more about it. And we're just really excited that we're able to give caregivers this support because, as some of you might know, it's really hard to find a therapist right now. It's not the most straightforward process. So this is a great way to receive some additional support. Going back to what I want to talk about today, I would like to give you a little preview of 8, and it might seem like a lot, but we're going to fly through it, 8 different techniques for reincorporating self-care, which if you remember at the beginning of this talk, I said that was our goal. So you might not, this is sort of like a box of chocolates. You might not like everything that's in here. I might talk about grounding techniques and you say, that's not for me. But my hope is that you'll take one thing from today and be able to really reincorporate that into your life. So let's talk for a moment about the stress response. You're all feeling stressed for obvious reasons. Maybe it's related to caregiving. Maybe it's related to the pandemic. Maybe it's related to your children not listening to you, not cooperating. Whatever it is, you're feeling stressed, and that stress is sort of following you throughout the day, if you will, because we have this thing called a fight or flight response. When we notice a stressor in our environment or we feel like our life is being threatened, even acutely, a car is coming at us, our body goes through into overdrive. Our cortisol, which is a stress hormone, goes up, adrenaline goes up, and we quickly get into gear to fight or to flee a situation. And that helps us to survive. But the problem is that nowadays, stressors are chronic. The stress of caring for someone with cancer is chronic. It doesn't really go away. It's there with you every day. Sometimes it ebbs and flows, but it's there. And so whether it's running from a saber-toothed tiger or work stress or being a first responder or being a caregiver, you are acting in the same way as if your life is being threatened. And what happens is that over time, although there's this immediate resistance to stress and a buildup of those resources in our body, eventually we reach exhaustion where we cannot physically sustain that physiological level of stress. And so we need to sort of find ways to prevent that from happening. That's the burnout. That's the crash that you all have probably felt. there's so many consequences of that crash. You might feel like your quality of life overall is really in the gutter. You might have more sadness and depression or worry and anxiety. You might, like I mentioned in the beginning, find yourself getting sick more often or have more chronic illness. You might feel socially isolated or have gained weight and feel like you don't have time for physical activity or have sleep issues. And so I list these here because so many people can identify with these things. And maybe on this list, I would encourage you to look here and choose one thing that you really feel like you want to start to work to change. Our goal is to help you regulate that stress response so that you don't reach the burnout and crash phase, meaning that we have internal processes that turn on the rest and relaxation phase of that fight or flight. So we're in fight or flight, we realize, oh, that threat is not here anymore. And so we can then slowly bring things back down. Sometimes our body doesn't do that or doesn't do that as quickly as we need to, that the threat has gone away and we're still so activated. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the way to kind of bring that down, to dampen the stress response by activating the relaxation response. And we talk about this first technique as grounding or self-soothing techniques. So the way to do this is if you notice yourself really in a state of panic or stuck in an anxiety cycle or having a panic attack, try to sit down comfortably and try to start to breathe slowly and then name, if you will, 5 non-distressing things that you see in your environment. So if I were to do this, I would name, I see a lamp, I see a plant, I see my computer in front of me. I wish I could see all of you. You would be non-distressing for me. I see a candle. So those are things that as I'm doing that, and then let's say I name 5 non-distressing sounds I can hear. Maybe I hear the heat or the air, depending on the weather. Maybe I hear a truck drive by. Maybe I hear some birds outside. So as I'm doing this, you'll notice you cannot physically think of the thing that you're worried about because you're listing things. Maybe you're naming the colors you see or the shapes or the things you feel in your body. I feel my feet on the ground. I feel my hands together, or I feel my arms crossed, or I feel my hair on the back of my neck. All non-distressing, and that all serves as kind of a temporary distraction to bring you back down. That's why it's called grounding. It kind of brings you back down to basics and allows you to sort of take a moment away from the thing that is causing that panic state. I encourage you to try this and see if it works for you. Again, the goal is to activate the relaxation response. So another skill that I want to go over is progressive muscle relaxation. So with progressive muscle relaxation, this is a way that we can be actively engaging in relaxation. If you'll join me for a moment, it might feel silly, but I'd like you all to just hold up your hands and arms at a kind of 45-degree angle, making fists, and tense your muscles, not to the point of pain, but just tense them and then relax them, drop them all the way down. And then again, tense them and relax them. And when you do this, what we're doing is creating a much bigger difference between a tense state and a relaxed state in the body. If I told you all, as probably most of you are sitting, maybe some of you are standing and good for you, but if you're sitting and I said, go from that sitting neutral state and now relax, you might notice that it's hard to do that. Like maybe I go back in my chair a little bit and I slump my shoulders and I try to relax, but it's hard to do. But if I say tense your body and then relax, you notice that difference. That's easy to switch from a state of tension to relaxation. What it does by practicing this is then allow you to more easily notice when you're holding tension in the body. What we're doing through this progressive muscle relaxation is increasing your awareness of times that you're holding tension. So you don't go through the whole day holding tension in your jaw or clenching your jaw or having your shoulders up here, a tension headache. You're more easily able to notice tension and then use relaxation to release that tension. So we're not going to try this today, but I leave this up here for you. You can do your hands and arms. You can do your face and neck where you just squinch everything together and pull your chin down to your chest. You can do your chest, shoulders, and back where you sort of bring your shoulder blades together, maybe arching, and be careful of any back issues, puffing out your chest. and take a deep breath. And then your thighs, calves, and feet, where you can kind of put your heels together and lift your feet off the ground and point your toes inward. And so if you go through each of these, tensing and then relaxing and tensing and relaxing, it both serves to notice that difference between tension and relaxation. And it's also an active relaxation, because sometimes if we just say, focus on your breath, or, count your breaths, it's easy to really get distracted and to start to think about other things. So a lot of people tend to like this one for that reason. There are so many other forms of relaxation that if that one doesn't work for you, I encourage you to look up. And even if you're interested in trying progressive muscle relaxation, which is one of the oldest forms of relaxation, you can just go on YouTube or on Google and put in progressive muscle relaxation, and a script could come up with a recording that you could listen to and walk through on your own. But there are apps, there are meditation hotlines, there are so many different types of relaxations that you can use. The third thing I want to talk about, so we talked about grounding, we talked about relaxation more generally, and now I want to talk about active coping. So this is when we really choose how we want to cope with a stressor. You've all been figuring out ways to get through, making, medical appointments, managing medication schedules, changing providers or getting second opinions, deciding what treatments that the person you're caring for is going to undergo, managing finances and bills and insurance issues. So you've all been coping. This section, I want to just encourage you to take a step back from that and think, is there anything that I can do to more effectively cope, or to be more aware of the coping strategies that I'm choosing to engage in? So for instance, we might say, what action can I take to resolve this situation? That we think of as a problem-focused approach. You're taking action, you're doing something. Then if I can't resolve the situation, what do I do to really manage the stress or discomfort that I feel? So that means I can't change that thing. I don't have any control over it. So I'm going to take a step back and do something else to manage that stress, that residual discomfort. The way to do this, the way to choose whether you want to use a problem-focused approach or an emotion-focused approach, is really first to identify what's controllable and uncontrollable about the thing that you're stressed about. You can try this as it relates to your caregiving experience, or you can try this otherwise with any stressor that you're experiencing right now. So if I said to you, what's controllable or uncontrollable about a snowstorm, which thankfully we don't have to deal with for several months now since we're in June, you might say that, well, I can't control when it's coming or how much snow we'll get, but you might say I can control that I stocked up, that I moved my car off the street, that I planned for extra time to get to work in the morning because of road closures. There's always things, no matter what the stressor is, that you can control and things that you can't control. But now, if you think about your own stress around caregiving or whatever other stressor you'd like to identify, kind of do this chart with me here in real time. You don't have to share, you can just kind of think about it. But what do you think is uncontrollable? For a lot of people, they'll say the fact that my husband or daughter or parent or whomever was diagnosed with cancer. The fact that we have to change our lives to accommodate treatment and medication and symptom management, all these other things that come up. What's controllable is always harder to think about, but that might be who we go to see, who is our surgeon, who do we get a second opinion, yes or no? That's in your control. What sorts of things do we do to get to treatment, and to, even getting to treatment is an active choice. I often say that and people say, well, that's not a choice. This treatment's going to save my life, but it is a choice to undergo chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, whatever the case may be, in order to, and to withstand the side effects that come with that can be quite debilitating. So that is a choice that people engage in. So now that you've done that, you've identified what's controllable and what's uncontrollable. You want to choose a problem-focused or emotion-focused technique in step 2. So this is when, for the problem focus, we say, what action can I take to resolve the situation? We make a decision, we resolve a conflict. This is your to-do list. We get more information if we need it, or we set a goal. We engage in problem solving, which can just mean breaking things up into smaller steps or making a pros and cons list. We might get help. And if we think we can't resolve the situation, what then can I do to manage the discomfort I feel? And these things are very individualized. These are your own self-soothing techniques. For some people, an activity that is calming is totally not calming for someone else. It can be totally activating. This can be as simple as watching a funny TV show and letting yourself laugh out loud, or taking a walk with a friend. It can also be more complicated, like planning a camping trip. But whatever it is, it should work for you. I want you to take a moment, and if you will, write into the chat and just engage with me, because usually I love to ask people in the audience this. Do you identify as someone who is really good at problem-focused coping or really good at emotion-focused coping? So if you'd write into the chat, I'm a problem-focused coper, or I'm an emotion-focused coper, if you're willing to share with us, because it just helps us to understand a little bit more about ourselves and what we really feel comfortable with. Some people, like I said, feel really comfortable with that to-do list. Okay, someone's saying problem-focused. We have 2 problem-focused copers here. Other people really like being able to take space away from things and sort of sleep on it for the night, or take a walk and clear their heads, and they're really comfortable in that space. So far, we have no emotion-focused copers, and this is so consistent, you guys, with whenever I ask people this, 9 times out of 10, people are really good at the to-do list. We're really good at getting stuff done. It's why you're caregiving. It's why you've stepped up to the plate in this way and stepped into this position, whether or not you feel like you had the choice. You have figured out how to get stuff done. So everyone is on here as a problem-focused coper. So what I want to encourage you to do is to start to think about, what are those emotion-focused coping things that I can do for myself? Because inevitably you'll reach a point in the day where you've done the to-do list, or that doesn't mean you solved everything, right? You might be waiting for a phone call back or an email back, but you can't move things along. And that is so stressful if you are a problem-focused coper. So that's when we want to shift into, what can I do to resolve the distress I feel? What's good for me? What's self-soothing for me? And we really want to match this up. So, So the last thing I'll say is that, if you stay too long in emotion-focused coping, where you kind of take a walk, you don't make a decision because you're just walking around the neighborhood, that's not good either, because that's more like withdrawal or procrastination or denial. But usually it's about being able to move fluidly back and forth through these zones of coping, so that that you can take some space for something before making a decision, but that you do come back and make the decision. Or vice versa, you've made the decision and now you need to manage the stress you feel. Can you go take a walk, or can you call a friend, or can you enjoy a cup of tea and watch a funny TV show? What is it that you can take time to do? Waiting between treatments is really hard for problem-focused. Absolutely. This is probably the thing we hear the most, either between treatments or waiting after scans have happened and you're waiting for results. You're waiting to hear about tumor markers, whatever that is. The waiting period is really hard. And so that's when I also want to encourage you. I worked with someone once who had a really difficult time. They had to travel about an hour to come to the hospital to visit their spouse, who had undergone a transplant, a stem cell transplant. And every day she had this hour drive there, an hour drive back, and 2 hours in the car. And she was like problem focused. And she just felt like during those 2 hours, she could not get anything done because she was just sitting in traffic. And we talked about, what podcast could you listen to, or radio show, or whatever, book on tape that you could find calm and you could find some enjoyment and actually turn that time into something somewhat pleasurable. I mean, I don't mean to be fluffy here, like sitting in traffic in Boston is just never going to be enjoyable, but there are ways to make it more tolerable for her. and to look at it differently, to reframe how we think about it. And this is kind of brings me into my next point, is that we have to sometimes find a way to reframe our thoughts. So the thought that these 2 hours were a total waste, she was unable to get anything done, anything accomplished. Instead, to think about, well, how do we turn to emotion-focused coping to manage the distress you feel, help you tolerate being in this I can't do anything place, right? Between treatments, we can't do anything. And find something that actually you can get some pleasure out of. And by reframing that time, how we think about that time, we can be more flexible to allow those possibilities in. Another way to reframe is just to ask yourself, is this thought really true? Or how much do I believe this thought? So you might notice yourself thinking things like, we can't get through this time. This is going to be so difficult. Or I can do this all myself. I shouldn't need to ask for help. Well, saying I shouldn't need to ask for help, I might say to you, this gray box, what would I say to someone else in this situation? Would I tell them, yeah, you should definitely do this all by yourself. You shouldn't ask anyone else for support and you should put it all on you. Or might I, what might I think, what would someone else tell me? Well, I'm telling myself I should do it all, but I know that someone else would stop and say to me, you really should think about accepting support from others. If you're thinking between treatments, for instance, worrying, what if this treatment doesn't work? Or what will the next scans show? And we won't be able to deal with it. Or, it's up to me to find the clinical trial that's going to save this person's life. I would encourage you to go to this purple box. What evidence makes that thought true or not true? Is it really up to you to find that clinical trial? Do we know for sure that the treatment isn't working or is working? What is the worst case outcome here? And for some people, the worst case is the worst case. They're thinking about life without their partner or their mother or their child. And that's a difficult place to be. And so maybe there is no reframing here because that's a quite rational thought. But oftentimes our thoughts might be exaggerations of, or like overly negative. And that's when we can remind ourselves that the thought is not a fact. When I say overly negative, I don't want you to start thinking positively. So anyone who knows me knows that I am not an advocate of positive thinking. We hear this all the time in cancer, people saying, just have a positive attitude. You just have to keep thinking positively. Don't think negatively. And it's just physically impossible to only think positive. It's not rational. It's not realistic. And it's really invalidating for people because within cancer, a lot of times and sometimes things don't work out. And we need to allow people to acknowledge that and allow people to have a spectrum of possibilities. But maybe your thoughts you've noticed are really all negative. And not that we want to get them to be to a positive place, but we want to find a more neutral middle ground where the thought can be, yes, there is a possibility that this treatment won't work. And at this day, at this time, we are doing this treatment. It is somewhat working, and we're going to keep following the doctor's recommendations until we're told to do differently. And so two things can be true at the same time, and we can kind of use that and instead of but to bridge those two thoughts, a thought that's worrisome and also a thought that says, what do I know to be true today? So I encourage you to kind of think about these boxes and say, how can I think about this differently? Our fifth topic is maximizing social support. This is one that I would say, if you want to write into the chat, what type of support do you feel like you really need more of? So if we think of, and I'll explain this a little bit more, but if we think of support in these three categories, practical support, people doing things for you, helping you with the laundry, picking up the dry cleaning, going to the supermarket, taking your loved one to a doctor's appointment. Psychological or emotional support, providing love and warmth or hope or just being there to talk. And then informational, which you might get more from your doctors or from credible websites, like guidance and advice. So if you want to write into the chat, what support do you feel like you have down? Say like, I have encouragement, that's good, but I need more household chores. And take a moment to just write in what you feel like you need more of and what you feel like you have. As you do that, I'll continue talking a little bit more about the sources of support that we can draw from. So it's really great to think about the types of people that can help us that we might not have thought about otherwise. So for instance, our friends are there, our relatives, but are there neighbors we've called upon? Are there other acquaintances, clergy or community groups or religious groups? Someone says they feel like practical is good, or they need more practical. They feel like they have enough emotional. Another person said that they need more emotional. So this is great. What I like about this is that this we don't often see, a real common thread, that some people have really good sources in one area and not enough in another. And so I encourage you to think about, who is the type of person you're calling on? Are you calling on someone who's really good at listening and asking them to do household chores that they're not so good at? Or is someone calling you to talk, but you don't need that emotional support at this moment? You really need some help around the house? Or you really need someone to take your spouse to his next appointment? Someone said more emotional support from people going through a similar thing. So are there support groups? Are there resources either within the hospital or online? The American Cancer Society has some, cancercare.org has some that might be able to connect you. There is a new peer mentoring program that we're starting at a few social workers are starting at the Cancer Center that might be able to connect you with someone going through a similar thing. So starting to think more about what are the ways I can get that support that I'm needing, and then asking yourself these questions. So what type of support do I need? Who can I rely on for this type of support? Maybe is there someone I haven't asked, someone who's been offering and I haven't called on? What are the barriers to receiving that support, and how can I reframe my thoughts around support? Number 6 is acceptance and mindfulness. So this is the briefest primer in here to acceptance and mindfulness, just to say that acceptance is not this is happening to me and I can't do anything about it, or that I just have to deal with it. Acceptance is a more active letting go and softening around something in order to be able to work through it, to find ways to work within it. It's sort of like saying it's okay to not be okay. Mindfulness is simply an awareness of the present moment. So as I was saying before with the reframing thoughts, I'm worried that this won't go well. And I know that today we are going to treatments. We are on top of things. We are doing what the doctors say and following recommendations. And this is what I know to be true right now. And that I choose not to go down the worry path at this moment. There's so much more to mindfulness, but I throw it out there just to say that it's a way to be present, to be to observe and notice what's going on now and not to have to change it. Sometimes we have uncomfortable emotions and they're just difficult to sit with. We've been taught throughout our whole lives to cheer up. And sometimes there just isn't anything to cheer up about. And we need someone to tell us that it's okay not to feel okay. And that's where acceptance and some mindfulness can come in handy. The second to last topic is activity planning and pacing. So this is just simply to say, when we are in the position of caregiving, whether it's for someone with cancer or children or anything else, we can often feel like we have days where we feel good and we want to get everything done, and then days where we feel sort of bad or we're exhausted from those days and we end up not getting anything done. And your activity levels can sort of look like these mountains and valleys, where one day it's really high, you get so much done and accomplished, and the next day you're kind of like flat out. What we want to do is try to get your activity levels to more of a rolling hills pattern, where that means that you're holding back a little bit on the days that you feel good. You're not necessarily listening to your body and saying, oh, I can keep going. You're saying, I think I can keep going, but I'm going to stop purposefully so I can conserve some energy for tomorrow. And that helps you be a little bit more even, and also affects your mood, because as you can imagine, on these low days, your mood is also really low. So this keeps mood at a little bit more of a stable level throughout the week. think about what are those activities that you may want to re-enter into your life, or as I call your pie, the things that you've not done that really make you whole. And then try from this list or any other list, you can just Google like list of pleasurable activities. So many things will come up. Plan activities based on how you feel. So your A days are like good days, I feel strong. B days, maybe I'm feeling really tired. And C days, I'm so exhausted, fatigued. Maybe I'm in pain. I feel like I can't get anything done. And sort of parse what I'm going to do on each of these days so that I don't feel like on any day I'm completely laid up in bed. And then that leads to more depression or more anxiety. These are all just reminders for self-care that you might want to incorporate. And as we go into this last topic, I'd like to encourage you to choose one that you might want to think about as you set an intention for self-care using this strategy. So asking yourself first, what is something I used to like to do that I haven't been doing? And can I reincorporate it back into my life, or do I need to do it differently? And if so, I would encourage you to be creative, and I'll give you an example about that. And then think what might get in the way and how can I overcome that? So essentially have a backup plan. So have a plan and then have a backup plan. This is an example that I can take no credit for, but was something used by a former mentor of mine who in this relationship, this couple used to love to travel. They couldn't travel anymore. And so they thought, instead of traveling, we're going to pick a country we would have wanted to go to, like Greece, order Greek takeout, watch a travel show on Greece, and have this night be about Greece. And then, they would do that for a different country or city that they wanted to go to. And it's nothing like getting on an airplane, and we all know that, but it allowed for some pleasurable activity to be reintegrated into their life and into their relationship by doing this kind of in really creative way that they both enjoyed discovering new things together. That was something that they liked about travel that they could still do in the comfort of their own home. So I don't ever mean to say that this will take place of activities, but if we feel defeated and that there's no point in doing something if we can't do it exactly like we used to, then we just won't do that activity. And we will deprive ourselves of the opportunity for positive reinforcement, the opportunity for joy and pleasure, and socialization even. And so this encourages you to just find creative ways to do the things you used to do, but do them differently. You can do this on your own, or you can do this with the person that you're caring for or with the person that's caring for you. And finally, I'll just say to please, if you are in crisis, these are some ways to get immediate help. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the Samaritan's Hope Suicide Prevention Hotline and others here. And finally, just as a reminder, if you weren't on more towards the beginning, that we are doing this study here at Mass General, where if you are feeling distressed, stressed, and you're caring for someone with cancer, you can enroll and receive 8 free private virtual sessions with us. And we really hope this is a way that we are starting to expand the support that we can give for people caring for the patients at Mass General. So if you're looking to get involved, again, here are the links. And if you're looking to just find out more about what we're doing in the Caregiving Research Program, which has only been established in the past few years, so it's really exciting, you can go to the website here, or feel free to send me an email. This is my personal email, jjacobs@mgh.harvard.edu. I always love to hear from people about what your experiences are and how we can tailor the programs that we develop to really meet your needs. So please feel free to reach out. And finally, just to say congratulations on taking the time to focus on you. Please do set an intention for self-care after this session. And we thank you for your participation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jacobs. That was an absolutely wonderful presentation. So many tips and tools. I hope everyone found this impactful and helpful and picked up something that they can use going forward. We do have time for questions. So if you haven't yet, please type your question into the chat box and we will get to it. We do have a question in regards to the research that you've spoken of. Do you have to be in the US to be a participant, or where geographically must you be to enroll?
It's a great question. So yes, right now you do have to be in the state of Massachusetts, just because with licensing, and this has become more standard now after COVID, but with licensing requirements, because the study is delivered by psychologists and social workers, you have to be in the state of Massachusetts where we are licensed. So I hope that we can expand that soon. So I'm sorry that if you're outside of the United States, we can't offer you the program. Huge bummer, I know.
If I am a caregiver in need of support, where should I go?
So great question. First, I would try our website to get some more information. We have some links on there at the Mass General Caregiving Research Program website. And then a few that I mentioned during the talk, the American Cancer Society has a great site that there's some videos, support groups, and links there. Also, cancercare.org is another place that I believe they do offer one-on-one individual therapy over the phone for caregivers. And also, I believe that Devin wrote in the chat, the Mass General Cancer Center Peer Support Program. So that's that peer mentoring program that I mentioned, where if you're wanting specifically support from someone going through a similar thing to you, that could be a really great resource that two wonderful social workers in the Cancer Center have been developing.
If I want to be more involved with the caregiver research that is going on at Mass General Cancer Center, how do I get involved? You did touch upon this, but could you just remind me?
Absolutely. So I'll share my screen again if anyone is interested. So here's my email address and our website. You can email caregivingresearch@mgh.harvard.edu. Maybe that might be the best place to start, and connect with us just about ways that you want to be involved. We always, like I mentioned, we think of the caregivers that we work with as stakeholders in our research, as people who help us to think through the design of some of our studies, what we want, what is the most important thing to target with the programs we've developed, and then also think about when we finish a study and we want to let people know about our results, how do we get the word out, beyond the medical journals that we usually publish in and the scientific venues that we talk about our work. We want to reach the general public. And so you're the best way to kind of help us do that and get the word out. So if you're interested ever in being involved in any of those phases and being a stakeholder in our work, I'd love to speak with you further. So you can email our caregiving research at mgh.harvard.edu.
And do you ever,
sorry, I was going to ask a question. If English isn't their primary language for the caregiver, is there any way for them to be involved in the study?
Great question. So right now it's for English speakers only, but we are hoping to be able to generalize out from there and open the study also to Spanish speakers. And there is a possibility that we could use a translator for that in the future.
Thank you.
And do you have any advice for sort of other family members who are involved in caregiving, but might not necessarily identify themselves as a caregiver? Do you ever encounter people who don't really feel that they might be the primary caregiver, but could benefit from some of these practices?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you asked that, Devin, because we did have, in one of the interviews we did, we had one person say to us, I'm not her caregiver, I'm her husband, and so that's just to say that we use the word caregiver and caregiving because we need some word, right, to be able to communicate what we want to communicate. And so that people in the position of caregiving get some attention, get some recognition, and we can make changes on the policy level. But that being said, you might yourself not really identify as a caregiver. Or you might be not the primary caregiver. You might be someone who's providing additional support and help, but not really living with the person, let's say. And you don't have to be living with someone to be the primary caregiver. And I think nonetheless, these are all ways to manage any stress going on in your life. And even if you're not, sometimes it's even harder actually to not be the primary person, because when we are the primary person, we can feel like we can take control or have more agency. And when you're not, when you're even once more removed, it can be sometimes harder to get the information you want to get from people, find out about the test results, get your questions answered. And so sometimes it can be even harder for those people who are a little bit more removed. So I would encourage you to still use the resources that I talked about today, to use the resources I mentioned that are online and support groups, because you don't need to be the primary person to benefit from these things or to experience stress and burnout from the process of providing care for someone.
Thank you for your answer. Do you have any advice for caregivers reevaluating their pie and the strength and the constraints of COVID and all of the anxiety that has been associated with it?
I think that is such a great question, and something that has been so difficult to figure out. How do we make our lives work when the things that we might have been your go-tos, right? By now in your life, you probably know what your go-tos are. I've worked with people who their go-to is getting a manicure. That's 20 minutes of alone time that is resetting for them, and that's what works. And during COVID, they couldn't do that. There's so many different ways that people can make up that pie, and so many of those ways have been limited by COVID. So I would say, find the things that you feel like you can do safely. And to sort of use that example, that travel example I gave, right? Those people weren't doing anything outside of their own home. And that was an example from before COVID ever happened. So, the idea that we can be a little bit creative to find ways to engage in pleasurable activities and in a way that's safe. I don't have, specific examples because you have to think for yourself about what's self-soothing and what's grounding and recentering or enjoyable for you. But one piece of advice I do have is to talk to a friend about this. Say, I used to get so much pleasure or joy or relaxation or calm from doing this thing. I can't do it anymore because of COVID. Can you help me think of like ways that I could do this, or ways that I can get that benefit, or how I could do it differently? You'd be surprised at how creative people can be. And especially when we put our heads together, they might be able to help you think through that. And then there's the sense of accountability. So then say, okay, great. Thanks for that idea. I'm going to do that this week. Will you check in on me and make sure that I did it? So then you sort of don't feel like you're so alone in doing that and making that plan.
Thank you. For anyone who is a caregiver or a loved one receiving treatment outside of MGH, are there any resources or groups that you could recommend?
I think for that, I would go back to the American Cancer Society and the cancercare.org. Those two are really very good sites that have online support groups and some over the phone counseling, video series and webinars that they do there as well. Psychologytoday.com. So I know that sounds like a magazine, but it is psychologytoday.com. And that is a great way to find a therapist that's in your local community. You can search by the type of degree that the therapist has, or their specific training or expertise, their location, whether they take your insurance. And it's a great way to find people. That being said, it's really hard these days to find a therapist, where there's sort of a nationwide shortage of therapists, and with COVID, the distress has really gone up. So if there's a way that you can contact, the place that your loved one is receiving care, and also find out through the social workers there if they have other suggestions, then I would encourage you to do that too, and sort of take like a multi-pronged approach.
Thank you. We have just a few minutes left, but we do have a comment in the chat box about it being very helpful, you talking about not being positive, overly positive all the time. Many caregiver relationships with the patient may suffer because of that. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, I think that goes both to people totally outside of the patient-caregiver relationship that might be telling them to be positive. And I think it can also go back and forth from the patient to the caregiver and the caregiver to the patient. And sometimes like people are trying to protect each other by not sharing information or withholding, or by telling the other person to keep their spirits up. But what we find is that just really doesn't allow us to experience the full range of emotions that are normal and appropriate to feel in response to something like cancer. And so rather to find a middle ground where we don't have to be overly negative or overly positive, but be more realistic and moderate about how we think about things.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope that you found this helpful, and thank you, Dr. Jacobs, for a wonderful presentation. Do you have any final parting words?
I wish you all good self-care this week. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for the amazing things that you're doing as caregivers and selflessly, providing help, support, and much needed assistance to people who are going through cancer treatment.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you.